Hi, welcome to Learning English with Pros. This is the channel where we draw on many years of university experience to provide you with reliable information on the English language and handy hints on how to improve your English. Hi, this is the first in a series of videos which is going to give you a systematic introduction to German-English translation and also in a way translation generally. In this first session, we're going to talk about the fact that many words have a very large variety of meanings. The technical terms for this are polysemy and modulation, and that you can't really trust dictionaries if you want to be an accomplished translator. Don't trust the dictionary. Dictionaries can't capture this huge variety, although they can be useful aids in the translation process, as we'll see as we go along. There's also the more theoretical insight in this first session that different languages divide reality in different ways. So they cut up the whole of reality into different segments, if you like. We'll see what this means in a minute. I'm going to take a four-step approach here. We're always going to start with an activity in one translation direction, in this case English-German. Then we're going to discuss translation proposals or solutions. The second step involves a discussion of strategies, the strategies we've used. So we're going to reflect on what we've been doing, and then we're going to summarize the insights we've gained from these activities, and we're going to apply them to the other translation direction, which is German-English, and also discuss potential solutions. This is the first activity. The idea is to translate the underlined words, just the underlined words and phrases, in this case I think it's only words for the time being, into acceptable German. At the same time, I'd like you to think about what your translations reveal about translation equivalence as a general concept. What do they tell us about equivalence between languages? And thirdly, I'd like you to think about the strategies you use to arrive at potential solutions. Do you use dictionaries? Do you just know the solutions off the top of your head or whatever? So note down those strategies. I suggest you stop the video at this point for a few minutes, and we'll discuss solutions in a second. Right, I'm going to take you through my own solutions now. The first three items, salt cellar, coking plant, and mobile phone, are what we normally call concrete nouns, and these usually have fairly fixed equivalence in another language, and this is, I hope, what you also found in your own research. So salt cellar is normally translated as Salzstreuer in German. That's the only modern equivalent. There's also a dated equivalent that's gone out of use. That's Salzfässchen. But usually what we're dealing with here is a one-to-one equivalence. Then we have coking plant, which is a slightly technical term. Lots of those in the industrial north in England, at least there used to be a lot of those, and in the Ruhr area here in Germany, there are a few left, I think. And this is Kokerei in English. So there's only one equivalent. Again, we have one-to-one equivalence here. With mobile phone, we have a few potential equivalents, the most common being handy, the other two being Mobiltelefon or Funktelefon, but no one uses these very commonly, I'd say. The next item is slightly more complex. It's the noun education, which has a number of shades of meaning in English, and we have at least two general German equivalents, Erziehung und Bildung. So you can educate children, which would be more like Erziehung, and we have a school system, for instance, that's responsible for the education of our youth, and this of course would be Bildung. So in the first sentence, when we have more important still is education, the best rendition of this into German would be Erziehung und Bildung, because it covers both shades of meaning in this particular context. In the next sentence, education, health, and so on, in that sort of context, it refers to the education system. In a way, it's short for the entire education system, so we'd have to say Bildungssystem. And in the third sentence, in sentence F, we have education as a discipline, as a subject at university, which of course corresponds to Erziehungswissenschaften in German, or perhaps Pädagogik also. So we can see that education is translated differently depending on context. It's a slightly more difficult term. We have what we might call one-to-many equivalence here. So what have we learned so far? I think we've learned that we need to make a general distinction between concrete nouns such as coking plant, which have a direct equivalent in English and only one equivalent in German, I mean, Kokerei, and abstract nouns like education, which usually have various shades of meaning and are more difficult to translate. Let's look at concrete nouns first. What strategies did we avail ourselves of to render those concrete nouns? Well, I'd suggest reading a definition in a monolingual dictionary first. I hope you came up with the same idea here. So read a definition in a monolingual dictionary first, because this is the way that native speakers of the language will normally describe the meaning of the word. Experienced native speakers, lexicographers, the way they define the word. And then in a second step, you can look up a translation proposal in a bilingual dictionary. So first read a definition in the monolingual dictionary, then look up a translation proposal in a bilingual dictionary, and then decide whether you've achieved a good fit between the source language and the target language. Alternatively, you might want to use Wikipedia, where you can often switch from one language to another if there are entries on the word you're looking for in both languages. This is very often the case with English and German, because these are the largest Wikipedia sites. Well, if you're happy with that, if you're happy with the result you find, if this satisfies you, then you can stop at this point. If not, if you're still unsure whether you've found a perfect equivalent, then you need to analyze parallel text. So for instance, if let's say coking plant wasn't in the dictionary for some reason, because it's now outdated, there are not a lot of these coking plants left. What you might do is compare historical texts, for instance, on the Black Country in Britain and the Ruhr area in Germany, and you'd be sure to find the relevant terminology, not just coking plant, of course, but lots of other nouns that would apply to the steel industry and coal mining and so on. Now, as we've seen, abstract nouns may sometimes have wider meanings or narrower meanings than dictionary equivalence suggests. So if you look up education in a standard dictionary, especially a small one, you'll find either Erziehung or Bildung, but in some contexts, the translator may have to resort to the coordination of Erziehung und Bildung in German to render English education. Sometimes the meaning may be slightly narrower. In the context of health and education, we said the best rendition would be Bildungssystem. So it's very important to look up the meaning of an abstract noun in a monolingual dictionary before translating it, and to analyze the context in which it occurs. That's the strategy you need to follow with abstract nouns. Here's another set of sentences for you to translate. This time, this is usually about one-to-many equivalences, as you'll see. So I'd like to ask you again to stop the video at this point, and we'll come back together in a moment. So what are the potential solutions? Well, wardrobe is usually simply translated as Schrank into German, although we might be more precise and say Kleiderschrank. And cupboard is also usually translated as Schrank, although in some cases, again, we could try and be more accurate and say something like Küchenschrank or whatever it might be. In a particular case, we don't have enough context for that here. Chemist can have two basic meanings, of course. This could be the university scientist, for instance, working at a lab, and that's, of course, chimica. And in Britain, at least, a chemist is also someone who runs what in America is called a pharmacy, sometimes also in Britain these days, so apotheker. The price of petrol has gone up again. Of course, here we would simply render petrol as Benzin, der Benzinpreis, der Preis des Benzins. But in the case of F, where we have we stopped for petrol, of course we'd have to say wir haben getankt. So we need to consider the entire unit stop for petrol as the unit of translation. Same thing with a wet paint sign was sellotaped. We couldn't translate this word for word by saying nasse Farbe. In German, we'd have to say frisch gestrichen. And another culture-specific term here, Durham is a collegiate university. This, of course, needs to be paraphrased in German. There is no term for it in German. It's a culture-specific term. So we'd have to say something like eine Universität, die aus mehreren colleges besteht. Okay, let's see what we've learned from these translations. So to begin with, we've learned that there are several types of equivalence when we translate from one language into another. From English into German, for instance, there are 1-to-0 equivalences, such as collegiate university, no real equivalent in German, no term in German that could substitute for this English word combination. Same with coroner or German Berufskolleg. These are cultural gaps, so we have 1-to-0 equivalences here. And we have 1-to-1 equivalences, as in the case of coking plant, which has a clear, direct, word-for-word equivalent in Kokerei, no other choice possible. Then there are 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 equivalences in the translation direction English-German. We have castle, which translates as either Burg or Schloss. In the other direction, we have a triple choice. We have Schloss, and in English we have castle, palace, and chateau. So this is what is usually known as polysemy. And then we have 1-to-many equivalences, as in the case of education, or a word like nice, which can be something that's nice to look at, or a nice person, or a nice difference, which is a very small difference, or it could be in tennis, for instance, someone plays a nice shot, which is a skillful shot, and so on. All these words, we'll also have a look at sophisticated later in another video. All these words are characterized by extreme polysemy and are therefore sometimes very difficult to translate. And there's something else we've learned that's worth remembering, and this is that the word is not the standard unit of translation. Now, just to illustrate this a bit further, every language, as you know, has idioms that would be totally meaningless if translated literally. So the unit of translation has to be the entire idiom. The German idiom, for instance, die Flinte ins Korn werfen, can't be translated literally as toss werfen a rifle or the rifle, die Flinte, in the wheat field. This wouldn't make any sense to an English speaker, of course. Which English idiom could be used here? Well, something like to throw in the towel, for instance. Okay, let's apply this to the other translation direction, our final step for today, German English. So see if you can apply what you've learned by translating the German sentences, this time it's about the entire sentences, into idiomatic English. So pay attention to the context and pay particular attention to the rendition of the underlying words, where you should think about the type of equivalence that we're dealing with. You don't need to translate the bracketed sentences, they're just there to provide more context. So stop the video again at this point, translate the sentences, and we can then discuss these in a few moments. Right, let's have a look at my translation proposals for these sentences. The first sentence went something like viel Obst und Gemüse und Kartoffeln, weniger Fleisch, müsste die Devise lauten. So this is nutrition advice. I already gave you the phrase should be the watchword, so you were able to concentrate on the translation of Gemüse und Kartoffeln. Well, English splits up reality differently here and subsumes potatoes under vegetables. So there wouldn't be much point in saying vegetables and potatoes. Vegetables on its own is quite sufficient. So a lot of fruit and vegetables, or veggies, less meat, eggs, fat and alcohol should be the watchword. In the second sentence, we're dealing with a fixed phrase, a ban you'll often find in front of English lawns. Keep off the grass. So betreten des Rasens verboten. We can also see that English is again more direct here, addresses the potential trespasser directly, keep off the grass. So it's a phraseme and it's formulaic, so we need to take the entire phrase into account rather than translate each word separately. I guess you solved this correctly just on the basis of intuition. Otherwise, you could have used a bilingual dictionary. You could have done an internet search looking at lawns in Britain, or you could have asked a native speaker. With C, we have Erziehung und Bildung, of course. Now you know that this should simply be translated as education, not as something like education and training or education and something else, because we've already done this in the other translation direction. So a potential solution might be a town like Aberystwyth, where education plays such an important role, holds its breath during the 2 days when the national exam results are published. Then we have a number of sentences that are based on the German verb fahren, which also has a very large number of different shades of meaning. In the first sentence, it's simply about movement, something moving at a particular speed. So the translation would be, later the train gathered speed or accelerated, traveling, one possibility, or moving simply through the night at 55 miles an hour. So if it's just about movement at a particular speed, we simply use move or travel. In sentence E, we're dealing with the Schwebebahn, a particular means of transport that's not very common. We have one here in Germany in the town of Wuppertal, and of course you take a means of transport. You take the tube, for instance, to go to work or whatever. You take the bus. So you also take the suspension railway. That day he had not taken the suspension railway. In the next sentence we have a word combination with motorway. With a motorway, the simplest way of rendering this is to get onto a motorway. So he got onto the A27 and came off again, coming up again at the Bremen intersection or Bremen interchange onto the A1. You could also say he took the motorway, very common word combination, or he went onto the motorway. Drive onto the motorway is perhaps a little bit too specific in this case because it's not so much about the action of driving, it's simply about this person using a particular route. And drive onto also appears to involve upward movement, as I point out here. So you drive onto a ferry, or you drive onto the pavement, or you drive onto a ramp, where the opposite is usually expressed by means of off, with a double F. Drive off a ferry, drive onto a ferry, and so on. In the case of H, this is the word, the word Schrank, of course. Sorry, that's the word we're looking for. The word Schrank. In this case, it's neither cupboard nor wardrobe, which we had in the other translation direction. There's another word for it in English when we refer to something where books are kept or stored, and this is the bookcase. So I took 2 books out of the bookcase, or from the bookcase, will be my translation proposal here. Then we have the word Splitter in combination with glass, which is a bit tricky as well. There are 2 possibilities here. We have splinters of wood, but slivers or shards, you know, the Shard, this new horrible building in the centre of London, shards of glass were found in a loaf of wholemeal bread, or in America that will be called whole grain bread. Of course, you could also opt for a simpler solution here and simply say pieces of broken glass and wood. Then we have 10 pralle Sack or Säcke Kartoffeln. In this case, I'd opt for bags of potatoes because a sack normally contains more than 5 pounds, and usually what we buy at the supermarket is not as large as that. So yes, I've lost 25 kilos. That's 10 bulging. We'll come back to the translation of prall in the next video. That's 10 bulging or completely filled bags of potatoes. Then we have the word chest, Brust in German, and since this is a man we're talking about, it's his left hand, we need to say chest rather than breast. So with his left hand he pounded on or hit his chest, shouting and shouted blah blah blah. And the last item again is formulaic, although you will not normally find it in any dictionary, so you'll need to ask a native speaker here, but you might have had an intuition that this can't be translated literally. There's a slight change if you compare it to the German version. You can't be too careful. You don't use never here in English. Thank you. See you next time.